Welcome everyone to a brand new what if story. What if Naruto fell in love with grayfia and was betrayed short movie. But before starting this video, I am really sorry for not uploading any video for over a week because reason is that I have actually find a job, so that the reason I am not uploading. But aside these things, I hope you guys like the video. Video goal is 300 views. I hope you complete this small goal. So without waiting any longer, let's begin the story.
Author note: republished just for me to look back at my work from back in the day. Originally published in October 2015. This is basically a time capsule kind of thing. A Phoenix's Fury. Prologue. The world's greatest hero bids the world goodbye. Naruto Uzumaki, on the cusp of his 100th birthday, sat in solitude. 75 years had passed since he assumed the mantle of Hokage. His long life puzzled many, attributing it to the famed longevity of the Uzumaki bloodline. Yet, the truth was something that only he and a few close confidants held. To the world, he was Naruto Uzumaki, son of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki, the fourth Hokage, and his fiery-haired wife. What remained a secret was the fact that Naruto Uzumaki was the transmigration of not just Ashura, but he was also the vessel of the soul of Naruto Phoenix, a man once deemed as the underworld's strongest devil. In a way, Naruto Uzumaki was always Naruto Phoenix, but this essence remained dormant until it was awakened when he was on the brink of death, battling Ishiki Otsutsuki. That battle had damaged the core of Naruto Uzumaki's soul, and it was only the resurgence of his Phoenix essence that snatched him back from the abyss. And upon this awakening, Naruto once again took hold of the power that brought him renown in his first life, and in line with this, the near immortality unique to members of the House of Phoenix. This Phoenix unique trait was the reason behind his longevity. A gentle smile played on his lips as he mused over the seamless fusion of Naruto Uzumaki and Naruto Phoenix. This fusion amplified his innate ability to turn enemies into allies, suppress threats, and maintain peace within the elemental nations. His reputation grew, a beacon that no Otsutsuki aliens nor sinister organizations like Kara could extinguish. Now, celebrating his 100th birthday, it was time for a change in scenery for Naruto Uzumaki. Sarada is still tough enough to take over as Kage, even at her age. Oh, I feel bad for Boruto. That kid can never take it easy when he has a wife like that. Naruto mused, a small smile making its way to his face as he fondly thought of the daughter of his two teammates, Sarada Uchiha, or as she goes by now, Sarada Uzumaki, his daughter-in-law. The world no longer needed him, and he has certainly lived a fulfilling life, one that gave him answers to all the questions he used to have as Naruto Phoenix. That's right. Naruto Uzumaki had decided that it was finally time to return to the underworld, his original home. An echo of sadness then threaded Naruto's thoughts as he remembered his proposition to Hinata, Boruto, and Himawari. He had offered them the chance to join him in returning to the underworld, his original home, but each had declined respectfully, choosing to remain in the elemental nations. But his heart swelled with pride, despite the tinge of disappointment. His family was resolute, dedicated to their dreams and the world they had grown up in. And so he'd accepted their decision, vowing to continue his duties as Hokage and head of the family until the world no longer needed him. This was a decision that Hinata and the children supported wholeheartedly, and 60 years later the time had come. It was time to go back. His joyous anticipation then stumbled as his thoughts drifted to that of his mother, Layla Phoenix. It worked out for the best. Hopefully, she would understand. As painful as what I did was to the family, it allowed me to be at peace. A shadow of guilt dimmed his excitement. He had left his underworld family in chaos, and now he hoped for understanding if not forgiveness. In retrospect, the tumultuous journey of Naruto Phoenix had been a blessing in disguise. His rage could have brought the underworld to its knees. That, Naruto was certain. It was ironic upon later realization how he chastised Obito Uchiha for his rationale behind the infinite Tsukuyomi. This was because Naruto Phoenix exited his world as a victim of love and betrayal, a life-changing checkpoint that almost led to his descent into darkness. The reason? His failed romance with another devil by the name of Grayfia Lucifuge, a love story that concluded in an ugly tale of betrayal and severed bonds. Grayfia was a beautiful woman from one of the family's extra devils that served Lucifer the Lucifuges. She had the beauty, brains, power, and attitude to keep even the most eccentric of men in line. She was indeed a wonderful woman, one that immediately took his fancy. She had originally been on the side of the old faction, but after meeting the 5 heroes of the new Satan faction, she defected and became a powerful ally of the new group. She quickly stood out to everyone, but none more so than Naruto and another devil by the name of Sirzek's Gremory, who both fell to her bewitching traits. Naruto eventually won the heart of Grayfia, and after some time together had decided to get engaged. This was an announcement that the underworld was looking forward to. After all, Naruto Phoenix was not only the underworld's strongest devil, but he was also the most beloved. And so the news of a new chapter to his life was met with joy throughout the underworld. However, the treacherous clutches of temptation intervened, shattering Naruto's happiness. His fiancée, entwined in an intimate embrace with Surzex, had been a sight of gut-wrenching betrayal. And it was staged in the very home Naruto had envisioned for their future. Although Naruto was already suspicious of the two of them, seeing the proof in front of him engulfed his mind into a state of rage and vengeance. And so Naruto attacked Surzex to the point of near death. The most striking part of that assault was a searing punch to the heart, symbolizing the heartbreak that Naruto had felt that day, a punch that left a permanent mark on Surzex's chest. But this wasn't the end of the story. A week after the incident, Naruto and Surzex did the only thing they could think of to resolve the problem and decide who Grayfia's heart belonged to. But unlike Surzex, who was in it to defend his own honor and to win Grayfia, Naruto wanted to duel Surzex simply to hurt him, as the duel allowed him to properly channel his rage over the entire ordeal. Because why would Naruto fight for the hand of a woman that had betrayed him, a woman whose heart now belonged to someone else? No amount of love could close the fresh wound that lingered in his heart. And so, Naruto and Surzex fought in a battle of pride and dignity that lasted for 2 days and nights. A battle where the only goal was to draw blood. The wrath of the Phoenix soared. Surzex bore the brunt of Naruto's fury, a vicious duel marking the beginning and end of a war between two of the strongest devils. Naruto's dominance was unquestionable. His victory was punctuated by the blood that bathed him. Surzex's blood. It was a cruel baptism by vengeance and heartbreak. But Naruto, despite his fury, let Surzex live. He may have been a betrayer, but once, he was also a brother. It was a testament to the complex threads of love and friendship that had woven their relationship together. Following the duel, tales of Naruto's earth-shattering strength swiftly became bedtime stories for young devils. His crushing defeat of Surzex was more than a battle. It was a message, a testament to the impenetrable might of the underworld's strongest devil. These legends were carefully crafted, designed to bolster the underworld's morale as it licked its wounds. But then, on the very day Naruto was set to ascend the throne as Mal Lucifer, he vanished, leaving nothing but his legendary tales behind. Yet his last words echoed, a promise cast into the winds of the underworld, whispered to a tearful Seraph the tree. I'll be back. And now it's time for me to return, Naruto thought to himself. In reference to Grayfia and Surzex, his one-time best friend and his ex-fiancée, Naruto held only indifference. He had carved out a remarkable life in the elemental nations, blessed with an extraordinary wife in Hinata, and 2 amazing children, Boruto and Himawari. When he counted his blessings, Naruto felt a triumphant sense of satisfaction. He had indeed won at life. Surely he could harbor hatred and rage towards Grayfia and Surzex for their past actions. But such negative emotions seemed petty and unproductive. The 7th Hokage understood that spite would not serve any purpose. Yet, this did not signify he was ready to renew their friendship. There existed a delicate balance between forgiveness and restoration of old bonds. In essence, he could only muster apathy towards them both. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle at the stark dichotomy between his 2 existences. In his first life, he had been overwhelmed by the loathing he held for Grayfia and Surzex, almost pushing him to the brink of desperation and going into places he wouldn't think of going. However, in his second life, he was able to forgive not only the man who caused the demise of his parents, but also the very villagers who had rejected him during his formative years. Maybe, he thought, fate was guiding him through both sides of the spectrum, prompting him to confront and answer his innermost queries before he left the underworld. To what extent should forgiveness be offered to those who have trespassed against us? Can wounds truly heal without inflicting the same pain in return? Was vengeance ever truly satisfying? Naruto had wrestled with these questions and emerged victorious with his answers. Now, he was prepared to share his wisdom with the world. His journey had transformed him from an enraged, betrayed devil into a sagacious Hokage. As he prepared himself for his return to the underworld, Naruto was enveloped by an intense calm. After all, he would be returning with a heart no longer burdened by resentment, but one filled with the wisdom of his experiences. His reflections were interrupted by a knock on his door. As he permitted entry, the door creaked open to reveal his son, Boruto Uzumaki, and his daughter-in-law, Sarada Uzumaki. "Happy birthday, Dad," Boruto offered, a smile illuminating his aged face. Despite the rough edges in their relationship, their bond, forged in love, remained unbroken. "Happy birthday, Hokage-sama." Sarada joined in, presenting a leather-bound tome to Naruto, which he received gratefully. "Let's drop the formality, Sarada. You're essentially my daughter, and after today, you'll be Hokage," Naruto laughed heartily, amused at Sarada's earnest respect. Boruto glanced sideways at his wife. They were already in their 80s, but Sarada still had the same hero worship for his father. It was honestly funny. "And a little creepy," Boruto added mentally. "It's an honor to succeed you in guiding Konoha, Hokage-sama. I promise to take care of the village in your stead until Minato-kun is ready to take over," Sarada vowed, offering a respectful bow to Naruto, who again chuckled at her ceremonial approach. Such decorum was indeed a far cry from her father's more casual manner. Naruto mused, "I have no doubt you'll excel, Sarada. Sasuke would have been extremely proud of the woman you've become." Naruto complimented her warmly, invoking the memory of her father, Sasuke, who had passed a decade ago. "So, Dad, is it time?" Boruto asked, his voice holding a note of solemnity. A few years earlier, Naruto had shared with Boruto and Sarada that he'd watched the elemental nations grow to the point where they could thrive without Naruto Uzumaki's guidance. Understanding his father's wishes, Boruto agreed, but he requested some extra years for their family to spend together, which Naruto granted. And so, he told the couple that he would stay in the elemental nations until his 100th birthday and finally return to his original world. The discussion had been heartfelt, and while tears were shed, an understanding was reached. Naruto Uzumaki had accomplished all he could. As harsh as it sounded, the world was now capable of flourishing without his direct supervision. Thus, a plan was made between the three. On Naruto's 100th birthday, Sarada Uzumaki would ascend as the 8th Hokage, and the world would unite in mourning for its most revered hero. "Indeed, Boruto," Naruto acknowledged. His son and daughter-in-law drew near, enclosing him in a tender embrace. "We'll miss you, Dad. Thank you for everything," Boruto murmured, valiantly holding back tears. Naruto responded with a loving smile, stepping back to begin chanting a spell. This was a spell he created in order to be able to return to his original world, one that took inspiration from the powers of Kaguya and Sasuke. Reditus, return. A halo of golden light enveloped Naruto, gradually consuming his form. "Thank you for everything, Boruto. And Sarada, take care of Konoha and my son in my stead. That kid may be old as bones, but he can still be dumb." Naruto laughed at his son, who sent a glare his way. His laughter lingered in the air long after his physical form had vanished. "That dad of mine, he just had to make fun of me before disappearing." Boruto gritted his teeth and glared at the spot where Naruto was. "Can he cut me some slack?" But despite his protests, Boruto couldn't hide the tears that were now flowing freely from his face. His father, although not perfect, did what he could to be the best father that he could be, and he would forever appreciate that. Sarada laughed at her husband. "Just let it go, okay? You're 80, for God's sake," the new Hokage said, patting Boruto's shoulders. Sarada then flung open a window in Naruto's office, gazing at the billowing clouds beyond. As the new Hokage, she had a mountain of responsibilities to shoulder, not to mention maintaining the peace Naruto had painstakingly forged. She could only hope she'd last long enough to do so. Because with Naruto Uzumaki gone from the elemental nations, it is indeed the dawn of a new era. End of prologue. Note: there's no character bashing that will happen in this story. If you think there would be any, then you need to go back to school and learn how to comprehend what you're reading. Author note: the scene immediately takes place upon Naruto's casting of Reditus, a phoenix's fury. Chapter 1. Initial Return. As the blinding light from the spell Reditus subsided, Naruto found himself standing at the threshold of a room that felt both alien and painfully familiar. The residual magic from the spell dissipated into the air, leaving behind the faint smell of ozone and singed fabric. Casting his eyes about, he felt as though he had stepped into a time capsule, an antiquated snapshot of his past. Like a forgotten museum exhibit, the room remained preserved in perfect stasis, untouched and undisturbed by the passage of time outside its walls. To think this place still looked the same for Satan knows how many years I disappeared, Naruto thought to himself as he examined the room he found himself in. This was the same room wherein he performed his spell Resurgo, Rise Again, a spell that forcefully reincarnated him into the elemental nations. Resurgo, a spell that Naruto himself created, was an advanced and highly experimental technique developed out of a desire to traverse dimensions. The idea of the spell was deceptively simple: the separation of the soul or essence from the physical body and its transfer to another world. However, the process was extremely dangerous, as the slightest miscalculation could result in a caster's death. Or at least, that was what Naruto concluded when his first test of the spell sent him into a month-long coma. Due to its inherent risks, Resurgo was never perfected. And so, when Naruto performed the spell a century ago, he knew it was a roll of the dice. A gamble with his life. A pseudo-suicide, if you may. Many scenarios could have unfolded due to Resurgo's unrefined, unperfected formula, and in its current form, Naruto discovered that the spell would reincarnate him as a baby, in a different dimension. An apt transformation considering the nature of rebirth that the technique revolved around. And while the spell guaranteed a rebirth, the retention of the past life's memories was not part of the package. Instead, it was a condition, an ordeal, that the caster needed to meet in order to regain their memories. Naruto wasn't sure if the conditions would be similar to all users, but for him, he regained his memories after he survived the initial tearing of his soul and the merging of his two souls during his battle with Ishiki. This was a testament to the volatility of the technique. Had certain conditions not been fulfilled, Naruto Phoenix would have never been reawakened, effectively killing that part of Naruto. What crazy luck Naruto Uzumaki had, Naruto thought to himself. Although Resurgo remained imperfect, Naruto devised a workaround that suited his purpose, to return to his homeworld. That was Reditus' return, a spell made possible by transporting the caster to an area where there was a large concentration of their magical energy. In this case, Naruto was transported to this room as it carried the largest residue of his magical energy. Naruto finally looked around the room, taking in its antiquated charm. The stone walls, etched with arcane runes that hummed with latent magic, were illuminated by the faint glow of phosphorescent fungi in sconces. Rows of wooden shelves lined the room, sagging under the weight of ancient tomes, scrolls, and bottles of exotic potions, their contents shimmering with unspoken power. In the center of the room was a sturdy oak table, pockmarked with burn marks and mysterious stains, a testament to countless hours of rigorous magical experimentation. As he looked around, a sense of nostalgia washed over him. The scent of old books and long-forgotten potions lingered in the air, a potent reminder of a past life filled with tireless exploration and untamed magic. He shook his head, bringing himself back to the present. He knew he couldn't dwell on the past forever. There was work to be done, and he was ready for it. He rolled up his sleeves and started to examine the room more closely, taking note of any changes that may have occurred in the centuries since he had last been here. Now that I have settled down, how could the room be so clean and dust-free after all these years? Naruto thought, his eyes tracing over the polished stone floor, the meticulously arranged paraphernalia on the shelves, and the scrolls that were neatly stacked instead of being scattered haphazardly, as they used to be. He could hardly believe that the usually cluttered oak table was now spotless, void of the usual disarray of parchments and quills, magic ingredients, and half-concocted potions. Naruto's eyes then widened in realization. There's no way, right? But that's the only answer that makes any sense. The blonde former Hokage's mind then conjured the image of a beautiful dark-haired woman with violet eyes. The only other person who knew about this place. Seraphal Citri, or Seraphal Leviathan, as was intended to happen following the Devil Civil War. Naruto's face, which expressed surprise a moment ago, turned into one of regret and shame. After all, Seraphal was the last person who saw him before he used his forbidden technique that transported him to Satan knows where, and he did so while Seraphal was mustering up the courage to confess her love. What a piece of shit Naruto Phoenix was. Naruto thought to himself, shaking his head at the thought of his decisions over 100 years ago. Or at least, it was 100 years for him. Naruto's gaze then found a faded painting on one of the shelves, showing him, Seraphal, and others they were close to. His eyes lingered on Surzex and grayfia, and just as he had already known, he felt nothing. But he recognized that both of them served as the trigger that led to him doing what he did all those years back. The betrayal, the pain, it was all too much. Which was why he fled, for he could not bear the sight of their happiness while his heart shattered to pieces. Now, looking back, he realized that he had not only run from his pain but also inflicted it on those he left behind, especially Seraphal. But to think she had taken her time to take care of this place despite not knowing if I would ever return. No, she didn't do it for me. She did it to cope with the fact that she had lost me. That said, I didn't expect using Reditus would use up that much magical energy. Good thing my chakra network remained intact. Naruto muttered to himself before he decided to sit on a rocking chair located near the corner of the room. The blonde sat there peacefully, rocking the chair back and forth. The routine continued for about a few minutes until a magic circle glowed in front of Naruto. And here I thought I'd have more time for myself, the blonde sighed. Considering what Naruto knew of this room, the magic circle appearing simply meant one thing. Seraphal had picked up on a presence breaking the barrier that was cast in this place. It was a strong barrier that broke after Naruto's entrance into the room. Emerging from the magic circle was a beautiful dark-haired woman with violet eyes, and going by her face, she was definitely not happy. To think someone would dare intrude in here. Do you have a death wish? Naru. Seraphal's voice faltered, her threatening tone replaced by shock, as she took in the sight of the blonde-haired man. Naruto slowly stood from the rocking chair, giving her a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sera? Seraphal's eyes welled up as she took hesitant steps towards him. She couldn't believe it. His presence, his voice, it was all too familiar, and yet it seemed like a dream. You, she began, her voice barely more than a broken whisper. She wanted to shout, to scream out the agony that coursed through her veins. But all she could manage was a whisper. Silent tears streamed down her face, glistening in the dim light, as a steely resolve replaced the hurt and betrayal in her eyes. You asshole. I know. I'm sorry, Sera. Naruto replied, a rueful smile on his face. His eyes held a quiet torment, reflecting the weight of a guilt he couldn't shake off. The silence returned, stretching the gap between them, punctuated only by Seraphal's shallow, shaky breaths. She moved towards Naruto, her eyes scanning him like a mirage that might vanish if she blinked. And then... slap. After everything, Seraphal started, pausing as the lump in her throat threatened to choke her. Her hands clenched and unclenched, nails digging into the palms of her hands as she fought the overwhelming emotions threatening to spill over. After you practically threw away your life. Why did you even bother coming back, Naru? Her voice trembled, each word echoing the heartache he left behind. Being the only one who saw Naruto as he cast his incomplete spell, Seraphal was the most affected by his disappearance. After all, she knew just how dangerous Resurgo was, as well as the implications behind the usage of the spell. That spell implied that Naruto wanted to begin anew, a life without the reminder of the pain he suffered at the hands of the same people he trusted. It hurt Seraphal. Because in the same vein, Naruto was throwing away his entire existence. One that involved her? That was why Seraphal didn't stop him. His decision hurt her, and at the time, she thought, if he wants to live a life without me, then so be it. It was a selfish thought from a girl in love, she would eventually realize. What if I convinced him to abandon that plan of his? She thought to herself repeatedly, but this thought would always be for naught. After all, what has happened has already happened. There was no turning back. That was why the current situation did not sit well with Seraphal, as it had broken the dam that she had built up over the years since Naruto had vanished. In Naruto's absence, Seraphal was a shell of her former self. Her childish and volatile demeanor belied the deep trauma from witnessing his apparent suicide. Now that he was back, all the masks that Seraphal had used to cover herself had shattered, finally revealing the true Seraphal that remained hidden over the past centuries. A broken, depressed, and traumatized woman who couldn't believe the cruelness of fate. Her violet eyes, once bright and full of life, now carried an indelible mark of sorrow. They were the eyes of a woman who had watched the world she knew crumble before her very eyes, the eyes of a woman who had to put on a brave face, while her heart was shattering. As she found herself facing Naruto for the first time in centuries, Seraphal thought it would be better had he not shown himself ever again. Because this entire relapse was the one thing she wanted to avoid experiencing, and had avoided up until the blonde returned. Seraphal closed her eyes, taking in a couple of deep, shaky breaths. When she opened them again, her violet orbs bore through Naruto's head. Everyone thought you were wandering somewhere in the human world. They lived life thinking you were still out there, alive and kicking. But me? I knew the truth. I knew you went to another world to forget the pain you endured. I understand that, but I cannot help being selfish, Naru. What about me? A heavy pause ensued, and both of them stared at each other, their eyes telling a story of 1,000 words. One was filled with regret, and the other with pain. And in the crushing weight of silence, Seraphal broke down, tears once again flowing freely from her violet orbs. You know, Seraphal began, I thought to myself that if I ever saw you again I would be able to tell you in your face that I hate you and couldn't care less about you. That I'd be consumed by my anger over what you did. But all those feelings faded when I realized that you, Naru, that slap, was tame compared to what I had been thinking of doing, she spoke weakly. As Naruto kept silent, Seraphal continued, I kinda hate myself for it, you know? I couldn't bring myself to do everything I imagined doing if something like this happened. Seraphal then let out a hollow chuckle. To think I was actually still in love with you. How pathetic. Naruto wanted to say something, to offer Seraphal words of comfort, that he would never leave again, but as he moved to open his mouth, he closed it shut, as he realized that his promises would only worsen the situation. This brought a retrospective thought within the blonde-haired man. In his life as Naruto Uzumaki, he always had something to say no matter the situation. He would set anyone straight, whether they be an ally or a foe, and it seemed like he always had the right words to say all the time. Of course, Naruto Uzumaki always had something to say. After all, Naruto Uzumaki never ran from his problems. He faced all his problems up front, and even in defeat, there was only a smile on his face and a renewed vigor to do even better the next time. That was not the reality of Naruto Phoenix, the man who ran away from his problems. While I lucked out on my experiences in the elemental nations, I've also damaged the people close to me. Here, in my life as Naruto Phoenix, I knew this would be the case, and I even prepared for it. But reality really is different, isn't it? This kind of reality settling in. I find it uncomfortable, Naruto thought to himself as he mutedly stared at Seraphal. But despite the heavy weight of regret pressing on his heart, Naruto squared his shoulders. The pain in Seraphal's eyes, the guilt gnawing at his conscience. It fueled his determination. I can't change the past, but I can still shape the future, right? He thought. Sera! Naruto called out. The dark-haired Mawu looked at Naruto, her face devoid of its usual bubbly and energetic expression. I still have a lot of things to say, but for now, I guess that's enough, Naru, Sarafal sighed. Do you want to stay here for a while? Naruto offered. No, give me some time to come to terms with your return, Naru. As much as I missed you, you're also the reason why I ended up like this, and I really hate myself for not finding it in me to ever hate you, Sarafal replied. Will you tell everyone that I have returned? Naruto asked. Sarafal shook her head. You should be the one who gets to decide to reveal yourself, she said, and then let out a wry smile. Another secret about you that I get to keep, huh? I truly despise this place. Then why did you even bother maintaining this place? Naruto curiously asked. Naruto, of course, knew the answer, but he felt the need to hear it straight from Sarafal's mouth. A deep, weary sigh left her lips before she answered. Because it's the only piece of you that I have left, you idiot. She didn't have to look at him to see the surprise on his face. Instead, she stared down at the floor, her heart pounding in her chest. Didn't I make it clear earlier? A bitter chuckle slipped past her lips, the sound hollow and void of any real humor. I still love you, Naru. Even when all that was left of you was a trace of magical energy, she confessed, her voice barely audible. The words echoed in the silent room, carrying a depth of emotion that made the air feel heavy. She then let out a scream before she wiped away the tears from her cheeks. Ah, you're such a pain in the ass. I'm leaving. And if you're going to leave again, have the decency to leave a note. I might never forgive you otherwise. Understood, Sira. Naruto murmured, watching as she stepped into the magic circle and disappeared. Alone once again, he slumped into the rocking chair, the weight of their conversation pressing down on him. He stared at the spot where Sarafal stood a few seconds ago, and let out a heavy sigh. The conversation with Sarafal may have only lasted for a few minutes, but Naruto felt like he had aged 100 years in the aftermath, the reality of the situation fully sinking in. It really was that bad, huh? Damn. As much as I did not regret the life I lived in the elemental nations, I really could have done something else. Something that wouldn't have caused this level of pain. My best friend in this world both loves and loathes me. My mother is probably devastated after my disappearance. Father, Ruval. Naruto pinched the bridge of his nose as the gravity of his actions fully hit him. The consequences of his choices were more profound and far-reaching than he had ever anticipated, a jarring realization that brought with it a rush of regret. Yet these painful realizations didn't deter Naruto. They merely highlighted the harsh truth of his predicament. And if there was one thing about Naruto Uzumaki that Naruto Phoenix desperately needed, it was the relentless will to continue fighting despite all the disadvantages thrown at him. This time around, Naruto Phoenix had that missing piece. With another heavy sigh, Naruto gazed at the room, the weight of the past and the promise of the future pressing heavily on him. The road to redemption was long and fraught with pain, but it was a journey he had to undertake. One step at a time, Naruto, he thought, steeling himself for the struggles ahead. One step at a time. End of chapter. Author note. Republished just for me to look back at my work from back in the day. Originally published in October 2015. This is basically a time capsule kind of thing. A Phoenix's Fury. Chapter 2. Kyoto. Kyoto, Japan. 2 days had passed since Naruto's return to his homeworld, and although the allure of the Phoenix Manor tugged at his heart, he held back, because while there was a time and place for nostalgic homecomings, this wasn't it. For now, it was more crucial to understand the world he was stepping back into. Because, at the moment, he was incredibly unaware of how the world currently functioned. He lacked information, and if there's one thing Jiraiya had always emphasized, aside from the wonders of perversion, it was the importance of having intel, and Naruto found himself clinging to that principle more than ever. Aside from that, Naruto also needed to learn how the world would view the name of Naruto Phoenix. After all, he wasn't blind to the underworld's shenanigans, specifically the barrage of political propaganda that the Bale's Great King faction would unleash. It wasn't outside the realm of possibilities that, in his time away, he had already been painted as a villain. That being said, Naruto decided to step away from the underworld in the meantime, and temporarily reside in the human world. Since Sarafal had hinted that the devils thought he was just roaming around the human world, he figured it would do him well to understand how things operated there, integrate himself into the world, and return to the underworld with a profound understanding of how things function. And so, the former Hokage currently found himself in the territory of the West Yokai faction. Kyoto, Japan. He chose Kyoto as his starting point since he was friends with Akari, the Kyuubi yokai who was the leader of the West Yokai faction before he departed for the elemental nations. But it seemed like he wouldn't have an easier time than he initially thought. Word on the street was that the faction was now led by a formidable Kyuubi named Yasaka, who was apparently Akari's daughter. It wasn't too much of a problem considering her mother could vouch for him, but Naruto thought it would be easier had Akari remained the one in charge. As he leisured around the crowded streets of Kyoto, Naruto shrouded his chakra and magical energies, effectively hiding from skilled yokai sensors. It just wasn't a good idea for someone of his strength to walk around Kyoto unannounced, as it would obviously lead to misunderstandings that he didn't want to deal with. Well, I could probably wipe them out if I wanted to, Naruto grimly thought before shaking them away. After all, he wasn't here to instigate violence. He was here to find his footing in a world he hadn't stepped foot in for Satan knows how long. Akari would definitely be surprised once she realizes I now have chakra, Naruto mused, a grin tugging at his lips at the image he had conjured in his mind. As he ambled through the busy streets, he was struck by the rapid pace of development he'd missed out on. Kyoto had changed in ways he could barely imagine. Buildings now kissed the sky, technology had clearly made leaps and bounds, and the sheer number of humans and yokai inhabiting the city was mind-boggling. Yet, amidst all these changes, Kyoto retained its unique charm. The faint scent of incense wafting through the air, the sound of temple bells echoing distantly, and the quaint blend of traditional and modern architecture. As he traversed the bustling streets, his eyes were drawn to a newspaper stand, where the day's headlines screamed at passers-by. His gaze landed on a small calendar pinned to the corner of the stand. As he read the date, his brows furrowed slightly, and then his eyes widened. The year marked was 2005. A subtle shiver of realization cascaded down his spine as he quickly made the calculations. 400 years. He'd been away for 4 centuries. His world, the elemental nations, was essentially running on a different timeline. 1 year there translated to 4 years in this world. But instead of the panic one might expect, Naruto felt an odd sense of calm wash over him. He had already accepted the strange temporal dissonance of the dimensions. Though he had been prepared for a significant leap in time, the fact that it was this substantial was still a surprise. Just another quirk of traveling between worlds, he thought, lips curling into a wry smile. But this makes things more complicated, he mused as his mind wandered to the 2 people who he believed were most affected by his 4-century-long absence, his mother, and of course, Serafal. Naruto already saw how his absence and subsequent return affected Serafal, but he could tell there was more to her feelings than she let on. On those few minutes that they conversed, it would obviously not be enough to dump everything she had felt for 400 years. May that be resentment, anger, longing, or whatever? And it was a tough pill to swallow despite the fact that he had anticipated that reaction from her. It became even worse now that he realized just how long he was gone. And then there was his mother, a woman of strength and grace who had likely been burdened with her own whirlwind of emotions. Despite their supernatural lifespans, 4 centuries was still a significant period of time. He hadn't seen her reaction yet, but he could only imagine the anxiety and worry she must have carried all those years. The uncertainty of his fate lingering like an unwelcome shadow. His heart ached at the thought of them living centuries with his absence hanging over them like a pall. But as remorse threatened to creep in, Naruto steeled himself. This wasn't the time for guilt or regret, but for understanding and mending bridges. It's all right. I'm here now, and I can now start doing something about it. About the people I had left behind, he determinedly thought to himself, a glint of resolve flashing in his cerulean eyes. With that, he took one last look at the newspaper stand, the date serving as a stark reminder of the task at hand, and then, he continued his exploration of Kyoto. Kyoto's city square was buzzing with life. Street vendors shouted their wares. Children's laughter echoed in the air, and an amalgam of smells tickled his nose. Amongst this symphony of city life, one particular scent caught Naruto's attention. It was a smell that made his stomach rumble in anticipation. His wandering gaze fell upon a roadside food stall. His eyes widened in surprise as he noticed the dish that was being served. Ramen. The appearance of the noodles, broth, and various toppings were so similar to the ramen he loved in the elemental nations that he couldn't help but feel a sense of nostalgia wash over him. Though ramen, as he knew it, didn't exist the last time he was in his world, it seemed that this dish had made its way into the cuisine here as well, albeit in a slightly different form. Excited by this discovery, Naruto decided it was time to grab a quick bite. After all, it wasn't just the ramen he was after, but the comfort of something familiar in this foreign land. Glancing at the food stall, Naruto excitedly pumped out a fist. Good thing Sarah was kind enough to give me some money to go by, Naruto thought, a smile forming on his face. Conveniently enough, Serafal popped into his place just as he was about to go, and Naruto was able to personally tell the Leviathan that he was going to the human world for a bit. The raven-haired Satan wasn't too surprised by his decision, but she was happy since it meant she would know where to find him, should she feel the need to do so. As she bid him farewell, she handed him some money to use while he was away. That said, while there were some things that he could sell for money, or he could perhaps decide to pickpocket someone, it would be child's play to him. Naruto found himself happy at Serafal's small gesture, before he left for Kyoto. Upon arriving at the ramen stall, Naruto was careful not to attract any unwanted attention. Despite his chakra and magical energy being well hidden, a group of yokai at the corner seemed to take note of his presence. But it wasn't hostility that sparked their interest in him. It was rather curiosity. Naruto tilted his head in thought. Do they sense something different about me? Or perhaps they're just curious about a foreigner having ramen at a roadside stall. He inwardly chuckled at the idea. Naruto, after all, realized why these yokais were acting a little antsy. They were talking about something that shouldn't be heard, at least not by someone who could do something about it. Pushing those thoughts aside, Naruto headed to the counter and ordered a good old miso ramen, and after acquiring a piping hot bowl of ramen from the stall, Naruto found a quiet corner where he could both enjoy his meal and survey his surroundings. The savory aroma of the ramen brought back memories, yet it was a comfort that existed in the unfamiliar. As Naruto chewed on his ramen noodles, his eyes half-lidded in nostalgia. He picked up on the fragments of hushed conversations drifting from the corner of the stall. Eavesdropping wasn't exactly his style, but he needed information. And given his exceptional hearing, honed from years of ninja training and natural gifts, the yokai's whispers were practically being delivered to him on a silver platter. It appeared that Yasaka's leadership was stirring discontent amongst some of the yokai. The whispers hinted at discord, with some factions quietly questioning Yasaka's decisions. The concept of a rebellion was even floated around, giving Naruto's return an unexpected twist. This could be rather interesting, Naruto mused, pushing another mouthful of ramen past his lips. While it was unfortunate that the yokai were dealing with political strife, it offered him a possible route to gain Yasaka's trust. If he could help her quell this rebellion, it would put him in her good graces, and securing allies, valuable ones at that, was always a good thing. A spark of mischief then flitted through Naruto's thoughts. This might just prove to be a very interesting opportunity, he thought, amusement flashing in his cerulean eyes. His plan was beginning to form. After finishing his meal, Naruto stood, dusting off his clothes. He had gained more than just nourishment from his visit to the stall. The information he had inadvertently gathered was priceless. The yokai's seeming unrest under Yasaka's rule could play into his hands in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. Here goes nothing, Naruto thought, making his way towards the group of yokai. He had a few questions, and hopefully they had the answers. Excuse me, he began, his voice even and non-threatening. I couldn't help but overhear what you were talking about. Could you share more about it? They turned to him, their faces suspicious at first, but as he continued speaking, their expressions eased. Naruto inwardly chuckled upon noticing how they eased up. It seemed like no matter the dimension, his unique charm worked just fine. But while they seemingly eased up, the yokais didn't talk. A moment passed, and then another, as the yokai continued to size him up. Well, it's understandable, after all. Why would a human, or someone who looked like one, take an interest in the yokai faction's internal politics? Naruto thought, a wry smile appearing on his face. But rather than recoil, he decided to play a card that would give him what he wanted. There's a saying I learned in my travels. Naruto began, grinning slightly. When you find yourself in a strange land, seek to understand it, lest you become a stranger yourself. To punctuate his statement, he allowed a minuscule fraction of his chakra to leak out. It wasn't enough to attract attention from any other powerful yokai lurking in the city, but it was enough to make his point. The soft golden glow surrounding him was subtle, yet it was distinct enough to be seen by the yokai around him. Their eyes widened momentarily, their pupils dilating in shock. That was far from a human's aura. It was more potent, warmer, and far more powerful than they could ever imagine. Despite the softness of its glow, the power it held was anything but gentle. One of them, a yokai who bore a striking resemblance to a tiger, grumbled. You're not just a human, are you? Naruto merely shrugged. His point had been made. He was no ordinary human. In fact, he wasn't even human at all, and he had the strength to back his claims. The metaphorical ball was in their court now. There was silence, then murmurs. Naruto waited patiently, allowing them the space to discuss among themselves. He had made his intentions clear. He was here to learn, not to dictate. Finally, the tiger-like yokai sighed, signaling the others to lower their guards. All right, you've proven your point, we'll talk. A sense of accomplishment welled up within Naruto, but he kept his composure. Step 1 complete, he thought, his grin never faltering. Naruto took a seat, casually draping his arm over the back of the chair as he leaned back, his posture one of ease, though his sharp gaze never wavered. His attention was on them, and they, the reluctant stars of this impromptu meeting, found themselves warming up to the charismatic stranger. The yokai, Naruto noted, were an assorted bunch, ranging from all shapes, sizes, and races. The tiger-like yokai, seemingly the leader, was the first to speak. His name was Shira, and he began recounting the faction's current political situation, giving Naruto a more intimate view into the web of discord and discontent that was slowly spreading through the West yokai faction. As Shira continued to speak, Naruto found himself nodding along to the rhythm of his words, mentally cataloging each detail that the tiger yokai unveiled. He couldn't help but liken this scenario to his days back in the Hidden Leaf Village. The internal power struggles, the ambitious individuals aiming for the top spot, the pawns unknowingly played, all too familiar. A memory surfaced then. A man cloaked in shadow, sharp eyes bearing into him with an intensity that he had only matched with his own determination. Danzo Shimura, a man who continually challenged the Third Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, and created a myriad of problems for the Konoha, all for the delusional claims of protecting the village's interests. A soft chuckle escaped Naruto's lips as he realized the amusing parallel. Here he was, decades later, hearing about an issue not so different from the ones he had heard when he was still in the elemental nations. It seemed that no matter the dimension, these political plays would always be commonplace. Something funny? Shira asked, pausing his narration to eye Naruto suspiciously. Naruto waved a dismissive hand, shaking his head slightly, just reminded of an old situation. Please, continue. As Shira resumed his account, Naruto leaned back in his chair, his eyes closed, but his mind actively piecing together the puzzle. The situation wasn't all that different from what he had experienced before. The same kind of political strife, the same kind of opportunists trying to exploit the situation, and the same kind of innocent pawns caught in between. Things never really change, do they? Naruto thought, letting out a soft sigh. The scale might differ, the faces might be different, but the fundamental issues remain the same. This realization brought an odd sense of comfort. Even though he was in a different world, the problems he faced were familiar. He had dealt with similar situations before, and he had come out victorious. He had faith that he could do it again. But you know, Shira began, his gaze drilling into Naruto, you seem remarkably nonchalant given the situation. Naruto's cerulean eyes snapped open, the corners of his mouth tilting upwards into an enigmatic smile. He understood the yokai's suspicion, the underlying distrust woven into his words. From Shira's perspective, a stranger had suddenly shown interest in their politics, an interest that was seemingly detached, a little too casual. In fact, the tiger probably wasn't able to grasp why exactly he was sharing such things with a stranger. You've got to love natural gifts. The blonde inwardly chuckled upon remembering the charm spell that he subtly cast on the yokai, just as he approached them. While Naruto Uzumaki was a dunce when it came to illusion techniques, Naruto Phoenix was a master at it. It may appear that way, Naruto conceded, leaning forward, but I assure you I'm not underestimating the gravity of the situation. A contemplative silence filled the space between them. Shira's eyes remaining fixed on Naruto as if attempting to read his thoughts. The room was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the seemingly casual conversation that had unfolded minutes ago. After a moment, Naruto broke the silence, his voice steady as he looked at each yokai. You know, I've been through something similar before, he began, his gaze unwavering. A situation where the walls were closing in, and it felt like there was no way out. His words hung heavy in the air, each syllable laced with a glimpse of the road the blonde had traversed. That time, I found a way to turn the tide, to change the circumstances. Naruto continued, a hint of nostalgia creeping into his voice. What do you mean by that? Shira asked, sounding more guarded as his mind worked like clockwork upon hearing the blonde's words. It seemed something akin to a warning he couldn't piece together despite the friendly demeanor Naruto was giving off. Naruto merely smiled, raising both hands as if telling them to stay calm. He could see the focused looks on the face of the yokai with Shira, as if they were preparing to strike or escape. I'm not here to further complicate things, in fact. Naruto paused for effect, his gaze steady, resolute. I believe I can help. A ripple of confusion traversed the yokai's faces, but Naruto simply chuckled, a light sound that echoed against the quiet hum of the afternoon. He rose from his seat, his gaze sweeping over the yokai one last time before turning towards the exit. Well, I guess I should go. I still have some things to do, Naruto said over his shoulder, his voice carrying the weight of an unspoken promise. Take care, Shira. I'm sure we'll cross paths again soon. With his parting words still echoing in the room, Naruto stepped out into the sunlight. As the door swung shut behind him, the murmurs of the afternoon welcomed him back into its embrace. Inside, the yokais exchanged wary glances, the weight of Naruto's words settling heavily in the room. Shira was the first to break the silence, his voice a soft growl. What do you think he meant by that? The others could only shrug in response, their faces etched with worry and curiosity. Outside, Naruto walked away, his silhouette slowly swallowed by the encroaching shadows. His confident stride didn't falter as he melted into the afternoon, leaving behind the bewildered yokais to mull over his ambiguous promise. Now, it was time to learn more about the world. End of chapter. Author note. After doing some research, Naruto being gone for 500 years, as intended, wouldn't work, and so we can assume that in this story, due to the presence of someone like Naruto, the war ended earlier, and thus he departed in 1605. Basically, the timeline is like this. Ajuka developed the evil pieces before the Civil War, 16th century. Take Zeotica's bishop as the first reincarnated devil just so we could have an established time for it. So it's 1538. The OSF didn't like the idea as they are purists. Then some years later, the war ensued, and then the war ended, which contributed to the loss of several devil houses, in addition to those wiped by the Great War. Now, he arrived in 2005, so this basically is pre-canon DXD, which we'll say, occurred in 2008, when the LN was first released.
Thank you so much for watching What If Naruto Was Fell in Love with Grayfia and Was Betrayed short movie. I know that video was very short, but what I can do, this fiction was too much interesting. That other will love it, but this story was only contain 3 chapter, but next video will even surpass this video interesting, I will make sure. So this is the end of this video. Also please complete this goal is to simple 300 views and also watch complete as well. We will meet in next video.